A quick warning, this episode includes cursing. This is the Pulitzer on the Road podcast, connecting Pulitzer Prize winners with audiences around the country. I'm your guide, Nicole Carroll. I'm a member of the Pulitzer Prize Board and a faculty member at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University. Each spring, 23 Pulitzer Prizes are awarded for distinguished journalism, books, drama, and music. On this podcast, we talk with many of the winners and hear the stories behind their prize-winning work. In 2023, Sanaz Toossi won the Pulitzer Prize in Drama for her play called English.
English is set in a classroom in Iran, in a TOEFL classroom. The TOEFL is the test of English as a foreign language. So if you're applying to a school in an English-speaking country and you're from a non-English-speaking country, you have to basically prove that you can speak and communicate well in English. So you have to pass this test. And it's about a teacher and her 4 students, and everyone has a different relationship with language and what it means to leave a language, which is connected to this idea of what does it mean to leave where you're from.
Sanaz started writing English when she was in graduate school at New York University.
I wrote English in response to the first Trump administration's travel ban, also colloquially known as the Muslim ban, just out of fury of the anti-immigrant sentiment.
Since then, the play has opened off-Broadway in New York and in theaters in Chicago, Washington, D.C., and London. This winter, the play opened on Broadway. And on this episode of Pulitzer on the Road, we're going to take you behind the scenes with Sanaz as she prepares for her premiere. Then, Sanaz will be joined by 2-time Pulitzer-winning playwright Lynn Nottage to discuss their origin stories as playwrights, the ways they bring joy and humor to difficult topics, and how they deal with reviews.
I was a hot mess this morning. I didn't get enough sleep. I remembered I had to say something today, so I quickly wrote something down.
It's the first day of rehearsal. The cast and crew form a circle of about 40 people. And after everyone introduces themselves, it's Sanaz's turn to speak.
This is the most open-hearted group of artists I've ever known. And when we gathered 3 years ago, we had no idea what we had. We were scared shitless. And we were just a revolving door of quiet panic attacks. And we were only here to tell a story that we all believed in and knew. And we held hands, closed our eyes, and left. I know with unshakable certainty that every single one of you belongs on Broadway. Every single one of us. And not because you're Middle Eastern or diverse, it's because you're an artist of high caliber, you are a master of your craft, and it's because you're good. I wrote this.
She goes on to talk about how they'll be opening this play on Broadway in the early days of Trump's second term. It's a time when the threat to immigrants feels very present again.
We may not change anyone's mind, and we're not here to change anyone's mind. We're here because we will dictate the terms of who we are, and we will draw the contours of our identity, and we will question the identity itself. We will express ourselves as tender and contradictory and fallible, even if it doesn't change the world. And we know our one play cannot and should not change the world. We should do this play anyway because I'm not ready to recant my belief that what we do matters. And I do not want to live in a world without story, without make-believe, where we don't go on a stage and tell the truth about who we are. So we belong here. We are exactly where we should be. Anyway, I love you all. I love you all. And get ready because rewrites are coming.
They have about 1 month before the show goes into previews. And right now, they're figuring out how best to occupy the space of a big Broadway stage.
We kind of just get up on our feet and we start blocking, choreograph, so to speak, where everyone goes. We're a classroom play. We have a lot of chairs. Where do those chairs go? Where is everyone sitting? When a student is presenting, where will they be standing? I'm going to do some more rewrites. Right now, I think my job is a little bit like, I'm their cheerleader right now. And making micro corrections as needed.
It's not just the space that's bigger. Everything feels bigger with a Broadway show, including her own vulnerability.
To be a theater artist means you show your whole ass. You show your whole ass every night. People can get up and leave your play. You can get flamed in a review. You can be misunderstood. And when it works, it is a reason to live. This is like, I think, the reason I was put on earth. Creating something together every night in a room full of people that can leave and doing it means you can kind of do anything.
A few weeks later, in January of 2025, Sanaz made her way to Broadway for opening night. It was exciting, of course, but it was also impossible for her to ignore what was happening in the larger world outside the theater.
Inauguration day was a few days ago, and this week, like, this question of birthright citizenship has been up in the air. Like, I am a citizen because of birthright citizenship, which is really unsettling and strange and really, really scary. And our artistic director is asking me to be a part of the pre-show speech. And the only thing I know to say is, I am the daughter of 2 immigrants. And it's why I wrote the show. And it's been like my artistic North Star has been to write us with dignity. And I'm so proud of it, but also, like, I think all artists are asking, like, what does it mean? What does it mean, like, when the world is burning? How do you make art? What do you talk about? Because today is opening and I feel joyful, like I have also opened the door to sadness.
After the show, Sanaz rushed backstage to be with her cast.
For them to be on Broadway, like, really means something. We've come so far, and, like, tonight we get to, like, celebrate that without any doubt.
All their hard work paid off. After opening night, English received rave reviews.
It's one of the best plays that I've seen on Broadway in a very long time.
That's 2-time Pulitzer-winning playwright Lynn Nottage.
It lived really beautifully on that stage. I loved the way that the director opened it up and the scent, and those actors really took the stage. They felt immensely comfortable up there, and I felt like I was in good hands at every single moment, and that's a real accomplishment.
Lynn and Sanaz sat down together a few weeks after opening night. That's after the break. Lynn Nottage has won 2 Pulitzer Prizes in drama. The first was in 2009 for her play Ruined, a drama set in wartime Congo. And in 2017, she was awarded the prize for Sweat, a very different play about union workers in America. Lynn and Sanaz sat down together in February of 2025.
Hello, Sanaz. I'm so happy to be here with you and have a moment to chat.
Thank you, Lynn, for being here. This is so cool, so wonderful for me.
We're going to talk about your play, English, which recently opened on Broadway to absolutely amazing reviews. And congratulations, the play was wonderful. It was immersive and provocative and immensely moving in the end. And the play has had an incredible journey. But before we get into that, I'm really curious about your origin story. I understand that you were thinking about going to law school, but then you decided to study playwriting. And I very similarly was thinking about going to medical school and then decided to study playwriting. So I'm wondering, what made you change your mind?
When I graduated college, I was a disaster. I was totally lost. I had suddenly had adult acne. Like, things were just not working out for me. And so I applied to law school, got in, my body seized up with terror. So I deferred a year. And I said, you know what? I had this trip planned to Iran. And when I was there in my grandmother's house, I had this urge to write about the beauty of her house and the beauty of the women around me, and also what it meant for me to be Iranian and American. So I wrote these plays, applied to grad school for dramatic writing or playwriting. And I said, if I get into grad school with a scholarship, I'm going to go try to be a writer, and I will give it my best shot and never look back. And if I don't get into grad school, I'm going to go be a lawyer, and I'm going to be a happy lawyer, and I'm going to live in a nice apartment and like have all the shoes that I want. And I got into NYU with a scholarship for dramatic writing. And it's funny, I still think there's a life in which I could have been a very happy lawyer. I actually really loved that there's something about law and like preparing a case. This is about preparing a story, so it felt like there was a lot of overlap. I love logic and fact-finding. And yeah, what was the pivot for you from medical school to playwriting?
I believe that we are intended to have many journeys in this lifetime. And I think for myself, playwriting was just one of those journeys. And I've been fortunate to have done other things. I worked in human rights for a number of years and did a lot of power temping for many, many years.
Absolutely.
I don't think I was ever meant to be a doctor. I don't know that I ever wanted to be a doctor, but coming out of high school and going into college, I was always very good at math and sciences. And so I think naturally I was pushed into that pocket.
Yeah.
And then I began taking playwriting courses and writing courses. And I thought, these are the things that are giving me joy.
Yeah.
And I want to live in this space longer. And I think that's why I pivoted, is that histology and chemistry were not making me happy.
Yeah, of course. Is there anything, though, in the like doctor-writer Venn diagram? Is there any overlap between those circles?
I'm sure there are overlaps. I think there's overlaps with science and math and music, with playwriting and sort of my love of research. But sort of circling back to your time in Iran, I'm curious, what drew you to writing plays?
I don't know if it's because my mom's side of the family are a lot of musicians. We have a lot of people with really great ears, people who are really attuned to rhythm. And then on my dad's side, my grandfather loved poetry, as many, many Iranians do. We come from this great lineage of poetry. So I think there's always been something to me about like gathering in a group and rhythm and the way conversation overlaps and the way conversation becomes music. That felt like that's what I love about writing. And that is something I think we do best in theater. And something about an ensemble, when I think about my time in Iran, I just think of like 13 people in a room in one set location. It just felt like I was always living in a play anyway. So it was just easiest to transfer it to theater, which I think is our most magical, most ancient form anyway.
And so after getting back from Iran, you went to NYU. And in your last year there, you wrote English. So when you were thinking about writing this play, did you do any research? Had you been in one of these classrooms?
I've taught English a little, and I've been taught other languages. So all of that lived in the play. I've never taken the TOEFL, but all my cousins have. So I've sort of pieced together everyone's trauma with the language. And I grew up speaking Farsi in the house. Farsi is my mother tongue, but English is the language that quickly came to dominate, the one I use most, the one I had to use most, and the one I suppose I feel most comfortable in, even though I don't feel very comfortable in it at all. And I also studied abroad in France, so I had the experience of speaking horrible French to French people, the experience of what that meant.
I'm really interested in how you sculpted the language of English, because you have this wonderful conceit where when people are speaking English, they're speaking it with a very heavy Persian accent. And when they're speaking Farsi, they're speaking it without an accent. And so how did you land on that? Did that come on the page, or did you discover that in rehearsal?
I thought, if this play is going to be about how hard it is to learn a new language, how dehumanizing it can be to live with an accent, and if I'm doing that specifically for an American monolingual audience, well, then they have to have full access to these people, which means part of that play is going to have to be in English that is most recognizable and most quote unquote human to my audience. And also, we're very familiar with the conceit of, like, you know, when you see a film adaptation of Anna Karenina and they're British actors speaking English, well, you know those people are actually speaking Russian. But we slip into that disbelief quite easily. So I felt like there's actually a lot laid out there already for use, but felt like the most natural thing to do.
At the end of the play, there is a beautiful moment in which we finally do hear Farsi. I was wondering why that was important to you.
So much of this play I wrote for a specific audience, like American monolingual. And this play is also I needed it to be also for Iranians and for two categories, like Iranians, like my parents who are from Iran, and then Iranian Americans, like myself, who were born here. There had to be something that was just for us. And that 30 seconds at the end in Farsi is for the Iranians, but it's also a way, I hope, for the American monolingual audience to like sit in discomfort just for 30 seconds. Because in this play, we've had characters talk about the pain of like having an accent, being misunderstood, not understanding what people are saying. And I wanted that audience to sit in what it's like to be in the outside of language, the outside of hegemony for 30 seconds. And I cannot tell you, Lynn, how many people come up to me after and demand subtitles.
Oh, really?
For that scene. I mean, it drives me up the wall. There's no quicker way to get me to want to start a fight with you. I say, like, if you ask for subtitles for that scene, you miss the train. I think you miss that whole play.
Yeah. I so agree with you. It was such a powerful moment. And I loved like sitting in the audience and having that strange disassociation of like, oh, suddenly I'm in a world in which I don't understand.
Yeah. And it's disorienting and yeah. Is there any question that comes up for you a lot in your plays that prickles you?
For different plays, there are, vexing questions that I get asked. I think one of them in particular, when I had written Ruined, which is about gender-specific human rights abuses, and a lot of the play deals with a really difficult, traumatic subject. And I decided that I was going to end with optimism and with beauty. Yeah. And I was often asked, well, why?
Yeah.
And there was a lot of criticism for choosing to have an happy ending. And I'm like, I wanted to place these Black women in a position where they could reach toward optimism and joy. And that was really important to me. And if you can't see that, once again, like you, then you miss the whole point of the play.
Totally. Oh, that's so beautiful.
I wonder whether you ever feel pressure to write about any specific topic.
Can I ask you that first? I want to know your answer to this.
Sure. I mean, I think it's, for many years, I'm much older than you. And I think when I came into this business, there was certainly an expectation that I was going to be centering a certain kind of story about Black women. And when I deviated from that, I found that I was criticized for it. Yeah. And I realized that if I was going to make it in this business, is that I had to always lean into my own truth, even if that truth sometimes made people uncomfortable. And I think that notion is what ultimately liberated me from expectations.
Yes. I love writing about Iranians. So I fit, I think, comfortably with what people expect of me in terms of like who I write for. I think maybe similarly, like what I want to do tonally and what I refuse to do in terms of like educating an audience can be upsetting. I think like for a long time there's still an onus on writers of color, but at least Middle Eastern writers to like explain the political situation to the audience. And I really refuse to do so. And I think humor opens us up to new thoughts and ideas. And I think the comment I get too sometimes is like, oh, wow, that play was funny. And it's like, well, why shouldn't it be? And like, yeah, that is something I bring to the table as a writer that maybe like you think doesn't jive with the identity of it all. It just...
That is so true, particularly about humor.
Yeah.
I find that so often audiences are surprised that the work about tough subject matter can be funny.
Yes, and that like in a play with tough subject matter, there can be a happy ending. And that like that also can't be true for people with who we think of as having quote unquote hard lives, that they also don't have happy moments and moments of dignity or moments of surprise and humor. It always has blown my mind that people forget like, oh, even in times of war, you're like worried about what you're going to wear and you're still vain. You're still a full person.
And I'm so glad that you brought that up, and sort of hearkening back to Ruined. I remember when I was doing interviews with women who were fleeing the armed conflict in Congo, and I was asking them to recount their stories, but I was always surprised by the moments of levity and how easily they had access to their smiles. And that just planted a seed in me when I was sitting down to write. I thought, I have to make sure that is embedded in the storytelling.
Yes.
That these are women who can be going through the most difficult thing, but they can still find their humor and they can still smile and embrace each other.
Yes, I wonder why for some people it's so hard to imagine that for other people, that their lives are also full of surprise. I don't know.
Yeah. But English is really funny.
Thank you.
But I read somewhere that you wrote it when you were very angry and thinking about Trump's travel ban against Muslims.
Yeah.
And this country right now is in an extremely polarized moment and lots of anti-immigrant sentiments. And so I'm wondering how you're assimilating that into your own writing, or how you're thinking about art, or how you're thinking about responding.
I thought I had changed a lot as a writer, and I think I have. And then so to return to this moment, we opened on the 23rd and Inauguration Day was on the 20th, and I suddenly thought, oh, here we are again. And I wrote English as like, I describe it as like my scream into the void. And I don't think 8 years later, I don't have the urge to write from that place anymore. I don't know if it's just like I'm a little older and a little more tired. And I am still angry, but my anger looks different now. I think now I have to write from a different place. I wrote English for a specific audience. I'm now questioning like what it means to write for that audience. The assumption being, if I write us with full dignity, can I change how people think about us? I have no answer to this question. I'm in flux about it. What are your thoughts on this?
I feel like it's really difficult to figure out how to process this moment and how to respond to this moment. And I feel I'm moving through so many complicated emotions, and like, how do you capture that and jar it and turn it into a piece of art that's coherent is my struggle, because I just feel adrift in some strange way. And I remember I opened my show Sweat, and I think maybe a week in New York before Trump was elected. And the next day, there was a palpable difference in the way in which the audience received the play.
Yeah.
I think that they left with more questions than they did before. I think prior to Trump being elected, I think people were very passive in the way in which they received the play. And I'm wondering, did you feel any like palpable difference in the way in which your audience responded to the play this go round?
This time, our audience, I have found, connects with Elham so much more. And she's the one who holds all the anger of the play of like, this is not fair. The world is not fair. It's not fair that I have to do this. And her arguments, I think, right off the bat of like, people are going to make fun of us when we go somewhere where we're not welcome. I think immediately an audience believes her.
I really responded to that character. I found her to be incredibly resonant. I liked her righteous anger, and I like that she so wanted to speak English, but she didn't want to give up her identity and her own language. And I think that that's something that so many people who come to this country and are asked to assimilate and immerse themselves grapple with, and even more so now, in which people are going to begin to hide their identity for safety reasons, which is really scary. So that's why I think that character speaks to audiences, because embedded in her is so much of the struggle which people are going through right now.
Yeah, she really names the injustice.
Yeah.
I love her.
And so on the first day of rehearsal, you gave a speech to the cast and crew, and I just want to play a short clip.
I know with unshakable certainty that every single one of you belongs on Broadway. Every single one of us. And not because you're Middle Eastern or diverse, it's because you're an artist of high caliber, you are a master of your craft, and it's because you're good.
Can you just talk a little bit about writing that part of the speech and what it meant to you in that moment to be standing in that rehearsal room on the verge of going to Broadway to tell this particular story?
I will say I did not want to go to Broadway because it scared me, because I thought what made our play special is that it's quiet and it's restrained, I think. And a refrain I would repeat to myself is like, well, we shouldn't be on Broadway. And I had to ask myself why I was so comfortable devaluing our play like that. I've come up against, I'm sure you have too, the idea that I fill a diversity slot in a season. I know that's complicated. And I also, at some point, had to stop talking to myself like I didn't deserve to be in all those rooms that I was in. And I decided going into rehearsal that I was going to stop saying, we shouldn't be here. It's crazy that we're here. Like, that cast they all made their Broadway debuts, which is incredible. It's also wild to me. All 5 of those actors, this should not be their first time on Broadway. They are so good, and they are just often getting relegated to their own version of like the diversity slot. So I decided that first day of rehearsal, like, we're not a Cinderella story. Like, we belong here. We worked so hard to be here. Our play is just as good as any other play. It's not crazy that we're here. It's not wild that we're here. And I just wanted to put an end to that, mostly for myself. So we wouldn't have to like apologize for somewhere that should be really happy to have us.
You're so right. There's so much to unpack there. Yeah. And I understand that complicated and very intrusive feeling that we're constantly pushing up against. And would you call yourself a political playwright, or is that a word that you push back at? I'm just really curious because it's a question that I often get asked.
On this question, I constantly contradict myself. I used to really push back on it. I would say, no, why am I a political writer? And why aren't white writers political writers? Why do they get to just write about the small, specific thing that is the human experience? Why do you need to talk about the Green Revolution in Iran in the program for my play? Even though I do think you should, but I pushed back on it because I thought it was unfair. And I, to some degree, think it's lazy in that it's really easy to see a Middle Eastern writer and tag their work as hyper-political. It's another way, I think, of dehumanization. However, English was written out of a political urge. It is written with the intention of advocating for a certain group of people, which I think makes a play political. Like, I think advocacy makes a play political in some way. And in terms of content of the play, yes, in some way, the political circumstances are dictating the action in the room. So it must be a political play. And by that criteria, are not most plays political as well? That's where I find the tension, and that's why I don't know that I can give an answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the answer to that question is embedded in the intent.
Yeah. Intent.
Intent of the play. I think that there are plays that can be about politics that aren't political.
Yeah.
Because the goal isn't really transformation or to illuminate or to press people to think differently about a subject.
Yeah.
And I do think that plays that are political sort of disrupt the status quo, and it doesn't have to be loudly. It can be gently.
So do you believe yourself to be a political writer?
I do embrace that. And I embrace it without shame.
Yeah.
I do think that when I sit down to write plays, I do it with intention.
Yeah.
And I center people who don't generally get centered on the American stage. And I know the mere act of doing that is a political act.
Yeah.
And it's going to be more and more political as our voices are censored.
Yes. Do you ever, though, find tension, of course, in like the way you are written about?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I can't control how people write about me, but what I can control is what I choose to say and how I frame my own arguments. And I do think that we are in a culture in which plays that are sort of unabashedly political make some people, critics, uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And they often get labeled as didactic or, they get slapped with labels because it's easier to ignore it and dismiss it than to engage with the complications of what's on stage.
Yeah.
I'm really curious about what you're working on now and whether you're writing for theater or television or film, or are you writing a musical?
I really want to write a musical. I would love to. Someone should reach out to me. I am writing for TV and film right now. I didn't write a play for a long time. And then the last year, I finally have found my plays again. In 2022, when we did English off Broadway for the first time, and then right after that, I did another one of my plays, Wish You Were Here, at Playwrights Horizons, and it was funny to go from English, which was acclaimed, to Wish You Were Here, which was not, but it was just my favorite play of mine, which is always how it goes. It's how it goes. It was also a great lesson to learn, right? To be lauded and then immediately spanked. I am really glad I learned that. And I love Wish You Were Here. And I think after all the good things people said about me really got in my head, and I thought in some way that I was beholden to those very, complimentary adjectives, all those nice things people said. So I couldn't write for a long time. And I know that, I suspect that English might be the play everyone ultimately knows me for. That's okay. Every writer has that play. It's so natural. Yeah. It is what it is.
It's great.
It's amazing to even be known as
but
a
also
writer.
To have that play, because there are many people who never do.
Exactly. To even have a calling card is mind-boggling. So now I'm okay with whatever I do next. If it's totally shit on, that's okay. I just have to like it. And now I'm just trying to figure out what's actually important to me. And I found it is still very important to me to write Iranians and however in my voice, whatever that means. And I would just like to push myself a little further and thinking about what I bring to the form, how I change it, if I can change it, what excites me about it. So that's the challenge right now.
It's so true. I mean, all we can ever do is really lean into the pleasure of writing,
yes,
regardless of what the outcome is.
Yeah.
And I always tell my students that to be a playwright, that you have to move between grandiosity and despair and be really comfortable in both spaces.
Yes.
Because over the course of your career, you will at some point experience both things.
Both are home. Yeah. Yes. That's absolutely.
It's so true. I remember one of my early plays was so badly reviewed that one reviewer called it an absolute 0. And then another reviewer said at the very bottom of his column, I'm not going to even bother to review this play.
Oh my God. The gall. Okay.
And then you have to get up in the morning and your friends call you and they talk to you like you've actually lost a limb.
Yes.
It's like I'm still intact. But also one of my other favorite things is one of my mother's best friends used to Xerox copies of my reviews, circle them, and particularly the bad ones, and say, I don't agree. I'm like, thank you for sending me my bad reviews.
That is really, thank you. What I wanted to see him up close again.
Yes.
Circled in red ink.
Like highlighted.
Just so I can visually remember it forever. Can I ask you, what is your relationship to reviews?
When I was a young writer, I used to read them. And there was a time when there were certain reviewers who I valued their voices because I thought that they had interesting things to say about the play. And it wasn't just merely about critiquing it, but really trying to understand what it is that the writer was getting at and whether, you succeeded in doing that. And so I always found those kind of reviews interesting and helpful. And then at some point I thought, reviewers aren't helping me anymore. They're making me feel bad about myself, even the good ones. And so I just decided I'm not going to read them at all. And I've had a healthier relationship to my work ever since.
Yes, absolutely. Good. Great.
Do you read the reviews?
When we did English the first time, my friends would send me like, you should read this one. And I would read those. And those really messed with my head. I should not have read those. The bad reviews, like I accidentally read some bad reviews for Wish You Were Here, and I found it really easy to shrug it off. Like, well, you're wrong, and I know what I'm doing. I really like the play. My actors really love the play, so I trusted that. I learned quickly not to read my good reviews. Nothing good came out of it.
But sometimes I got a bad review for one play that so enraged me.
Yeah.
I don't know why it got under my skin, but I thought that the reviewer really got it wrong.
Yeah.
And I actually wrote to him.
Good.
To tell him all the reasons why he got it wrong. And he actually wrote a letter of apology.
Wow.
To me. And he said, after re-engaging with the work, after living through the election of Trump.
So this was a review on Sweat.
I was wrong.
Wow.
Because he was really dismissive of the subject matter, saying, I don't understand why, we're in the room with these people right now and why we're talking about unions. And, this is a play for the past. And I wrote to him and said, I don't know which America you live in, but this is the America that I live in which we're sort of living in a world where we're fractured across economic and racial lines.
Well, that's nice.
And he actually did apologize in the press.
Great.
And came back and reevaluated the play, which I appreciate.
I appreciate him. I also just want to make, I have to come clean. I really was able to shrug those bad reviews off. And the day after Wish You Were Here did not get a good review, Marjan Neshat, who is my muse, I guess, she's in all my plays. She's in English, and she was in Wish You Were Here. She texted me. She said, let's talk. I know you read it. And I said, I don't care. I don't need to talk. She said, call me. I said, I don't want to talk. She said, please just call me. I called her. She goes, hi, how are you? I burst into tears. That's also true. It hurts and then it doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah, but I feel like that's part of the muscle that we have to develop as writers, particularly if we're going to tackle tough subject matters, that there are always going to be people who are not going to respond for a multitude of times.
Good advice for all of us.
I think that many people are going to wonder a little bit about the journey of a playwright. Mm-hmm. I know that when I made the decision to quit my full-time job and write full-time, that in order to survive, I had to do a lot of different things to cull together a living.
Yeah.
And so I'm just really curious, when you decided that you're going to be a playwright, what were the first steps that you took?
So I went to grad school with a scholarship. I think that relieved me of a lot because I didn't have to immediately start making a bunch of money to pay back my loans. I lived at home for a long time and I worked. So I was saving money and working and writing my plays. So immediately I think that put me a few steps ahead. And I had a feeling that I should put all my eggs in one basket. So I worked really, really hard on English and decided like it was going to be worth it, even if it was just my calling card, even if it wasn't going to be produced. It was going to get me a lot of opportunities because I thought it really represented like what I can do. I think it's worth for writers like being able to name what you bring to the table. I'm theatrical and I'm funny. And I think the best lesson I learned was learning how to talk about myself and being really confident in who I was as a writer. In that year that I did 2 plays back to back, I did not make good money. The number that's coming to my head is so low, and I think it's right, but I don't want to say it because I don't know if it's true. Not a livable wage, just to say it clearly. And so now, like many playwrights, I sort of subsidize my playwriting with TV and film. I love working in TV and film, and what I love about it, it's like a group effort. Playwriting is solitary. It's also what I love about playwriting. But that is how I financially make it work.
How did winning the Pulitzer change things for you? And what was that like? Where were you? How did you find out?
I was at SFO. I had just seen English at Berkeley, so I was flying back home to LA where I lived at the time. I knew it was Pulitzer Day, and I had to pretend it wasn't. I was like, I'm just going to have a normal day. I'm not going to be, I'm not going to let myself be disappointed. Like, I'm just going to have a normal day, and if whatever happens, happens. And I got through security and got a call from my agent. She told me, I said, Rachel, are you sure? She goes, hold on. She played it back. She goes, no, yeah, I'm sure. And I was at an airport, and I came of age after 9/11. So I'm really, that's the lesson you learn is play it really cool in an airport. And then, I boarded a plane and my phone died. And then I went, and then I came back home and I was so overwhelmed. So I had to just watch something to turn my brain off because I was in my apartment alone. And so I turned on The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills because I thought I was going to have a panic attack. And I kind of made a vow in that moment. I said, what I'm not going to do is take this away from myself. I'm not going to say, oh, you got it. You won because of that. I'm just going to let myself enjoy this. Then after the ceremony, had a huge party. So I celebrated. It, of course, opened, these doors to career opportunities. Later, like I got to staff on TV shows because of English. How about you? Both times?
Well, the first time it was really a surprise because my play was about the Democratic Republic of Congo. And by definition, it should not have won the prize because it's supposed to be about American themes. Yeah. And so, I changed it all for us.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. Yeah.
But I was at home, so I wasn't expecting it. And the call for me actually came in from Associated Press.
Oh my God.
And the guy was on the other line and he says, how does it feel? I'm like, oh, me? And so I was shocked.
I think the more profound change it had in my life was that something happened to me that I thought would never happen to me. I never thought I would win a Pulitzer. I thought, oh my God, how great it would be to get to be a finalist one day. But that had happened, and it happened pretty, I guess, English isn't my first play, but with my first produced play, I had to think about the ways in which I have kept myself small my whole life, and how I've let people talk about me as if like I belong in the diversity slot because I have like kind of a Valley Girl voice and I say like a lot. My experience growing up is people immediately think I'm dumb. I know I'm smart, so I'd never have ever internalized it. But I had to think about shedding that and owning that I am a writer who should be here. I know what I'm doing. I deserve to be here. And, I'm so grateful that this is what I get to do with my life. And I believe we need artists and writers for democracy and just for living and for humanity. And I am one. So that I would say is like the most profound way it changed my life.
That's it for this episode of Pulitzer on the Road. Thank you to Sanaz Toossi, the 2023 Pulitzer winner in drama, and to two-time Pulitzer-winning playwright Lynn Nottage. For more details about this work and the work of all Pulitzer winners, please visit our website at www.pulitzer.org. Please subscribe and rate the show wherever you get your podcasts. Pulitzer on the Road is a production of the Pulitzer Prize Board and is produced by Odyssey's Pineapple Street Studios. This show is hosted by me, Nicole Carroll. Our senior producer is Justine Dom. Natalie Peart is our associate producer. Our executive editor is Joel Lovell. The head of sound and engineering at Pineapple Street is Raj Makija. This episode was mixed by Marina Pais, with additional audio engineering by Pedro Elvira. Music licensing by APM, editing, promotion, and other support by Pamela Casey, Edward Clement, and Sean Murphy. Barry Finkel and Marjorie Miller are our executive producers.